The only invitation I got for Thanksgiving was silence. I still drove to my father's house in Stonebrook, and my stepmother gave me a slap that cost her everything. They thought I would be silent, but I brought things they didn't expect: the truth, the law, and the key that would unlock every single family secret. My name is Avery Calder. I'm 29 years old, and I work as a clinical analyst at Helix Point Diagnostics. That means my entire life revolves around data, patterns, and an objective search for the truth. It's a job that requires precision and an ability to see what's really there, not what people want you to see. It was this part of my brain, the analytical part, that first registered the pattern. It was a pattern of omission, a carefully curated silence in the weeks leading up to Thanksgiving. The family group chat, ironically named Calder Cross Crew, had fallen silent whenever I posted my questions about the holiday. What time should I plan to arrive? And what can I bring? Were met with digital air. Then, the logistical messages began, but they were happening somewhere I could not see. My stepsister, Brielle, posted a picture on her private story, one I was only able to see because a mutual friend showed me, of her and Delia, my stepmother, holding up matching Turkey Day Prep Squad mugs. The caption read, "Gearing up for the best, most intimate Thanksgiving ever. Just us." Just us. My father, Graham, had been evasive for weeks. Our calls were short. His voice was thin, strained. When I asked about Thanksgiving, he'd mumbled something about Delia handling the plans, that he was staying out of the kitchen, a weak attempt at a joke that landed like a stone. So, I knew. They were not inviting me. It was not an oversight. It was a decision, a deliberate, collective act of exclusion from the home I grew up in, the home my mother had decorated, the home that still held the faint scent of her perfume if you knew where to press your nose against the cedar paneling. A different person might have accepted this. A different person might have stayed home, ordered takeout, and wallowed in the betrayal. But I am an analyst. I need the data. And more than that, there is a stubborn piece of my mother in me that refuses to be erased. So, on Thanksgiving morning, I went to the farmer's market. I bought the largest, most perfect pumpkin pie I could find, the kind with a hand-crimped, buttery crust. I went to the florist and bought a spray of white lilies and silver dollar eucalyptus, my mother's favorite. I got in my car and drove the 2 hours to Stonebrook, the entire way a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I kept repeating a single phrase to myself, a mantra against the rising tide of hurt. Not being invited doesn't mean it's not my home. The log house stood against the gray Oregon sky, smoke puffing from the chimney. It looked warm. It looked like everything a home should be on Thanksgiving. I could see the glow of the television through the front window. The game was on. I parked behind a new, expensive-looking SUV I didn't recognize. Brielle's, no doubt. I walked up the stone path, holding the pie in one hand and the flowers in the other. The door was cracked open, probably to let out some of the heat. A wall of savory air hit me. Roast turkey, sage, melting butter, and cinnamon, and underneath it all, the sound of laughter, bright, easy laughter from a dozen voices, and not one of them was calling my name. I pushed the door open. The laughter stopped. It did not fade. It was cut, as if with a knife. A dozen faces turned to me, forks halfway to mouths, glasses suspended in the air. The entire living room, which opens onto the dining area, was full of people, aunts, uncles, cousins, and Delia's friends, all seated around an extended table. And then I saw her, Delia Cross, my stepmother, rising from her seat at the head of the table. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater, her blonde hair perfectly styled. She glided across the room, her expression one of polite, theatrical confusion. She was a performer, and this was her stage. When she was a few feet away, her smile, which never, ever reached her cold eyes, became fixed. "Avery," she said, her voice a smooth, dangerous whisper. "We weren't expecting you." "Clearly," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Her eyes flicked to the pie. then to the flowers, and then back to my face. The mask slipped for just a second, revealing the hard, cold contempt beneath. "This isn't your place anymore." I looked past her, searching for my father. I found him, standing near the fireplace, frozen in place. He was clutching a drink, his gaze fixed on the floor. He looked pale and much older than his 63 years. He didn't look at me. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, hands clasped behind his back like a man awaiting a verdict, like a debtor who couldn't pay. His silence was the loudest sound in the room. "The table's full." Avery, Brielle's voice, bored and sharp, cut through the quiet. She was lounging in one of the armchairs, swirling a glass of white wine. She didn't even bother to look up. "We already said grace and everything. You're late." The cruelty was so breathtaking, so casual. It almost knocked the wind out of me, but I held on. I held on to the pie, onto the flowers, onto the last shred of my composure. "I'm not here to eat," I said, directing my words past Delia, hoping they might reach my father. "I just want to put these flowers on Mom's table. That's all." It was a small, antique mahogany side table that had always stood in the entryway. It was the one piece of my mother's furniture I had insisted remain after Delia moved in. It was my one non-negotiable piece of territory. Every holiday, every birthday, I placed flowers there for her. It was our ritual. Delia's face hardened. "Oh, that old thing?" she said with a light, dismissive laugh. "We moved that to storage. It just collected dust and got in the way." She took another step toward me, crowding my space. "You don't get to just walk in here, Avery. You are a guest in this house, an uninvited one. You are a stranger." "I am not a stranger in my mother's house," I said, my voice dropping. "Your mother is gone," Delia hissed, the smile completely gone now. "And this is my house. We have guests. You are making a scene." "I'm not making a scene. I just want to leave these," I said, my grip tightening on the flowers. I tried to step around her, toward the empty space where the table used to be. "No," she blocked my path. Her hand came up and she didn't push the flowers. She swatted them, a violent, angry gesture that sent the bouquet flying from my hand. The glass vase I'd put them in at the car shattered on the hardwood floor. White lily petals, eucalyptus leaves, and shards of glass scattered across the entryway. "Now look what you've done," she seethed. "You've brought your mess into my clean home." I stared at the broken glass, at the ruined flowers bleeding water onto the floor. Something inside me, a dam that had been holding back years of quiet slights and tiny cruelties, finally cracked. I bent down, my knees hitting the floor, my hands automatically reaching to pick up the broken stems and the larger pieces of glass. "Don't," I whispered, more to myself than to her. "Just don't." As I started to rise, a stem clutched in my hand. Delia moved. She shoved me, a hard, two-handed push to my shoulders that sent me reeling backward, my feet tangling, my balance gone. I would have fallen if I hadn't hit the wall. And then she hit me. It wasn't a push. It was a slap, a full, open-palmed, ringing slap across my left cheek. Her rings, the gaudy diamond cluster my father had bought her, struck my cheekbone. The sound was electric, a sharp, wet crack that obliterated every other noise in the house. The football game, the clinking of silver, the background music, all of it vanished. There was only the ringing in my ears and the blooming, fiery heat on my face. My eyes watered instantly from the pure shock of the impact. I looked at her. I looked straight into her eyes, and what I saw terrified me. It wasn't anger, it was satisfaction, it was triumph. She had finally done it. She had finally made me the trespasser she always said I was. The entire room was frozen. My father hadn't moved. Brielle was staring, her mouth open. I took one slow, deliberate step backward, away from her, my hand moving to my wrist. The analyst in my brain, the part that had been dormant, suddenly clicked on. The shock receded, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. My fingers found the button on the side of my smartwatch. I pressed it twice. A tiny, imperceptible haptic buzz vibrated against my skin. The microphone was on. Audio was recording. I raised my eyes back to Delia's. I let her see the red mark on my cheek. I let her see that I was not crying. Her face twisted, the satisfaction fading into rage as she realized I was not crumpling. I had not run. "Get out," she spat, her voice low and venomous, a final command. "Get out of my house right now, before I call the police for trespassing." I just looked at her, the tiny red light on my watch hidden under my sleeve, capturing every word. The slap wasn't the beginning, it was the end of a long, cold war. A war I had been politely pretending wasn't happening. It started the day my father, Graham, married Delia Cross, a year and a half after my mother's death. Delia arrived with an enveloping, buttery warm laugh that charmed everyone, but her eyes were always moving. They were calculating, constantly assessing the value of every object, every person in the room. They were the eyes of an auditor, not a stepmother. Her first act was one of gradual, systematic erasure. My mother's photographs vanished, one by one. The large portrait of her that hung in the study was the first to go, replaced by a framed certificate detailing Delia's contributions to local charity, a large, gaudy thing that screamed self-congratulation. The smaller, silver-framed photos on the mantel, my mother at the beach, my mother holding me as a baby, were swapped out for new photos. Delia and my father at some black tie gala. Delia and her daughter, Brielle, on a ski trip. She was curating the house, painting over my mother's memory with her own veneer of benevolent philanthropy. The new hierarchy was established almost immediately. Brielle, Delia's daughter, became the sun around which the household orbited. When Brielle turned 17, a brand new convertible, a deep metallic blue, appeared in the driveway, topped with a ridiculous red bow. When she decided she wanted to be a conceptual artist, she was enrolled in an absurdly expensive private art institute in Seattle, a 4-year commitment my father's finances clearly strained to support. My own achievements were met with a polite, vacant smile. I navigated my way through Oregon State on a patchwork of scholarships, student loans, and grueling part-time jobs. I graduated with honors, debt-free, and secured my position at Helix Point through sheer, unadulterated willpower. My success was my own, built in silence. Brielle's was a loud, expensive performance, bankrolled by my father and directed by Delia. Before Delia, I had been the household's administrator. In the fog of my mother's illness, I became the one who managed the schedules, the one who sorted my father's medications, who paid the household bills online, who knew the precise schedule for the lawn care. I knew my father's social security number by heart. I knew the name of his cardiologist and the exact dosage of his beta blockers. When Delia arrived, she saw this as a threat, not a help. "Oh, honey," she'd said one afternoon, placing her hand over mine on the desk mouse, her rings cold against my skin. "You're a young woman. You shouldn't be worrying your pretty head about all this boring adult stuff." She smiled, that warm, smothering smile. "Let me take this burden off your shoulders. You go be young." It wasn't a favor. It was a coup. She seized the passwords, the checkbooks, and the key to the medical lockbox. I was demoted from partner to visitor in my own home. The small humiliations piled up, becoming a wall. I remember the day I called, my voice shaking with excitement, to tell my father I had received my big promotion at Helix Point, the one that came with a 20% raise and my own research project. I drove over that weekend, hoping for a small dinner, a word of congratulations. When I arrived, the house was buzzing. There were balloons in the foyer and a 3-tiered cake on the dining table. I felt a sudden, foolish flush of warmth, thinking they had surprised me. Then Brielle walked in holding her pug, Sir Reginald, who was wearing a tiny custom-made tuxedo. It was the dog's 3rd birthday. My promotion was never mentioned. I spent that evening, the newly promoted senior clinical analyst, washing champagne flutes from Sir Reginald's party. I stood at the sink, my back to the living room, listening to Delia give a toast to Brielle for her emotional depth in her latest abstract painting, which was, in fact, a canvas splattered with black paint. I just washed the dishes, the water scalding my hands. Delia loved to invent new traditions. These traditions were, without exception, tools of exclusion. Last year, she had floated the idea for Thanksgiving. I was thinking, she'd announced in the family group chat, that this year we should make it just for our core, immediate family, a quiet, spiritual day, just for us. The implication was a cold knife. Immediate family meant Delia, my father, and Brielle. I was the extended relative, the other, that time, my father, perhaps sensing the cruelty, had weakly intervened. "Don't be silly, Delia," he had texted back. "Avery is, of course, immediate family." Delia had retreated with a digital, "Of course, darling, just a silly thought." But I knew she hadn't forgotten. She had registered the loss, and Delia Cross does not lose twice. I moved out 2 years ago. I told myself it was for peace, to be closer to my job in the city, to escape the 90-minute commute. But the truth was, I could not breathe in that house anymore. I couldn't watch the slow, methodical poisoning of my father's memory and autonomy. I couldn't stand the smell of Delia's cloying perfume, which seemed to sink into the very woodwork. But I still cared for the house, the physical structure my mother had loved, last year, when a winter storm damaged the roof. My father called me, panicked. The insurance wasn't covering the full amount, and the contractor needed $8,000 immediately. Delia, he'd whispered, was too stressed to handle it, so I handled it. I paid the bill directly from my savings, alone. My father had called it. I never saw a cent of it back. Around that time, I started noticing other things. My father, always frugal, suddenly had strange, recurring charges on the joint bank account we still shared from my college days, an account I kept open to send him money if he needed it. There were vague, alarming charges for household renovations and landscaping projects, thousands of dollars, withdrawn in round numbers. I tried to access my father's primary checking account online, the one I used to manage, only to find the password had been changed. When I asked him about it, he looked confused, his eyes glancing toward the kitchen where Delia was. "Oh, Delia handles all that now, honey," he mumbled, lowering his voice. "She's got it all organized on her computer." I later discovered organized meant she had consolidated everything: his email, his bank portals, his investment accounts. She had become his digital and financial gatekeeper. I once sent him a critical email about a potential drug interaction I'd read about, a new study relevant to his heart condition. Delia replied, from his email address, "Thanks for the note. Avery, his doctors are fully aware and say he is perfectly fine. We have it handled." And my father, he was fading. He was always a quiet man, but Delia's presence had turned his silence into an absence. He seemed weaker, more forgetful. He'd repeat stories he'd told me an hour before. He'd misplace his keys, his wallet. When I tried to book an appointment with his longtime physician, the receptionist informed me I was no longer authorized. "I'm sorry, Ms. Calder," she'd said, her voice full of administrative pity. "Mrs. Cross is the only approved contact on Mr. Calder's health proxy now." Delia's story was always the same, delivered with that warm, concerned smile. "The doctors say he's just fine. Avery, just the normal signs of aging. You're upsetting him by fussing." She insisted he was stable, healthy, and happy, but she refused to let me see the new medical records. She refused to let me speak to the new specialist she'd found for him. Delia was meticulous. She wasn't just erasing me from the present. She was rewriting the past, to her friends, to the extended family. She painted a specific, tragic portrait of me. I was Avery the ungrateful one. I was so busy with her important career that I had no time for her poor, aging father. I was detached, cold, not a family person, she would sigh, loud enough for others to hear. I try so hard to connect with her, but she just doesn't want to be part of this new family. It breaks Graham's heart. She used my independence, the very trait my mother had fostered in me, as a weapon. My hard-won career became evidence of my cold ambition. My financial self-sufficiency became proof I didn't need family. My silence in the face of her passive aggression was twisted into agreement. So it all led back to this Thanksgiving. This wasn't just a missed invitation. This was the final move in a 5-year campaign. Delia had successfully walled my father off, medically and financially. She had rewritten the family narrative to cast me as the villain. She had poisoned the well, and now she owned the property. This year, when she floated the immediate family tradition again, there was no one to stop her. My father, physically weaker and mentally isolated, didn't have the strength to fight back. Being excluded from the text chain, from the dinner plans, was the final, public declaration. I was no longer family. I was an outsider, a stranger. When I showed up anyway, when I dared to defy her curated narrative, I wasn't just an uninvited guest. I was a flaw in her data, a variable she couldn't control. I was a threat to her entire, carefully constructed world. The slap wasn't about a bouquet of flowers. It wasn't about a broken vase. It was about power. It was Delia, in front of a dozen witnesses, finally putting me in the place she had been clearing for me for 5 years. Outside the door, I didn't turn back. I didn't get the pie, and I left the lilies bleeding water and glass on my mother's floor. I walked out the door. My footsteps, the only sound in the suddenly, shockingly silent house. No one called after me. Not my father. The drive back to my apartment was a 60-minute blur of adrenaline and ringing ears. I didn't feel the throb in my cheek until I was parked in my own concrete garage, the engine off, the silence of my car replacing the silence of the house. I looked in the rearview mirror. The dim overhead light was unforgiving. The mark was already there. Not just a red blush, but an angry raised welt, high on my left cheekbone. I could see the distinct, crescent-shaped indentations from her rings, a constellation of small bruises already forming. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. They weren't just shaking, they were vibrating with contained energy. But my mind was ice. The analyst took over. Shock is a liability. Data is an asset. I took a deep, steadying breath. I reached for my phone, my fingers surprisingly steady. I stopped the audio recording on my watch, and the file instantly synced. I plugged my phone into the car's system, the one I use for podcasts, and pressed play. The small, dark space of my sedan filled with the sounds of that entryway. My own voice, tight and low. I just want to put these flowers on Mom's table, that's all. Then Delia's, a smooth, condescending hiss. Your mother is gone. This is my house. I heard the sound of her hand swatting the bouquet, the sharp, tragic shatter of the glass vase on the hardwood. It was louder on the recording, explosive. And then, the audio spike, a sharp, sickening, wet crack that made me flinch, even though I was expecting it. It was the sound of her hand connecting with my face. It was followed by 2 seconds of pure, ringing silence. I listened to it again, the sound of the assault, a dozen people holding their breath, my father's absolute, damning silence. And finally, Delia's voice, low and venomous, the words that would change everything. Get out of my house right now, before I call the police for trespassing. Trespassing. She had used the word, she had provided the narrative, and she had delivered it right into my microphone. My first instinct was to call the police in Stonebrook, but what would they do? Walk into a warm, brightly lit Thanksgiving dinner, listen to a dozen witnesses Delia had already charmed, and see me, the estranged daughter who'd shown up uninvited? I had to be smarter. I work with data. I know that the person who files the first report often wins the war of words. I Googled Oregon legal aid domestic violence. I found a 24-hour hotline for the county. My voice was flat when the intake paralegal answered, devoid of the tears I refused to shed. I need legal advice. I was just assaulted by my stepmother. I expected skepticism. I got procedure. Are you in a safe location? Yes, my home. Was the assailant a family or household member? Yes, my stepmother. Did she make physical contact? She slapped me across the face, hard enough to leave a mark. I have a recording of it. The paralegal's tone didn't change, but the speed of her words did. Do not delete that recording. Do not go back. We strongly advise you to document the injury immediately. Go to an emergency room or an urgent care facility. Do not wait. Get a medical report that details the time, location, and nature of the injury. Ask them to take photographs for the file. This is your primary evidence. My next stop wasn't my apartment. It was the emergency room at St. Jude's. The waiting room was fluorescent and smelled of bleach. The triage nurse, a woman with kind, exhausted eyes, looked at me. What brings you in tonight? I was assaulted, I said, the words tasting like metal. I need a medical report for a legal file. Her kind eyes hardened with professionalism. She nodded, marked something on her chart, and said, "Right this way." It was humiliating. I sat in a cold exam room for an hour. A young resident came in. He shined a light in my eyes, gently touched the swelling, his touch clinical. "This was a hand?" he asked, his voice neutral. "Yes, she was wearing rings." "It's a significant contusion. We're going to document it." He took out a hospital-issued digital camera. The flash was blinding, merciless. He took 6 photos. "Turn your head to the left, now the right." He dictated his notes to the computer, his voice a monotone. "Patient presence with facial trauma to the left cheek. Significant edema and contusion. Several small abrasions consistent with jewelry. Patient states she was struck by her stepmother at approximately..." I left 2 hours later, just after 9 p.m., with a prescription for an anti-inflammatory I wouldn't fill and, more importantly, a thick packet of paper, a medical legal document, a fact. When I finally got back to my apartment, the smell of my own clean laundry and old books was a comfort. I didn't cry. I made coffee. I sat at my desk, the ER report on one side, my laptop on the other. I backed up the audio file in 3 separate places, encrypted cloud storage, a dedicated thumb drive, and I emailed it to my own work address, burying it in a project folder labeled Clinical Data. Then, I compiled the narrative. I opened my messaging apps. I took high-resolution screenshots of the Calder Cross crew group chat, the weeks of silence, my questions. What can I bring? What time? All marked, read by Delia, read by Graham, read by Brielle. I screenshotted the text logs from my father's number, the terse, unhelpful replies that I now knew were coming from Delia. I had to try, one last time, to get through. I dialed my father's cell. It rang twice. Delia's voice answered, crisp and cold. Graham Calder's phone. "Delia, I need to speak to my father, now." A heavy sigh. Performance art for an audience of 1. "Avery, you have done enough damage for one day. Your father is extremely upset by your behavior. He's resting, and I will not have you bother him. I am his daughter. I need to hear his voice. Put him on the phone." "You are not in a position to make demands," she said, her voice dropping back to the icy tone from the entryway. "You came here, uninvited, and you ruined Thanksgiving. You scared your father. He does not want to be bothered." Click. She hung up. I sat there, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. He does not want to be bothered. She was cementing the story. I was the aggressor. My phone lit up. A message from my old neighbor, Mrs. Brandt, who still lived 2 houses down from the Stonebrook house. We'd exchanged Christmas cards. Her text read, "Avery, dear, I hope you're all right. I saw you leave. After you left." Delia gathered everyone on the porch, crying. She was telling your aunts and cousins that you've been unstable, that you flew into a rage and threw your mother's flowers at her. I don't believe a word of it, but you should know what she's saying. Unstable, flew into a rage. Delia wasn't just defending, she was attacking. She was using the exact language needed to discredit a victim. An hour later, the public execution began. A notification popped up. Delia Cross tagged you in a post. My blood ran cold. I clicked. It was a photo. A perfect, warm, glowing photo of the dinner party. My father, Brielle, Delia, and a dozen smiling faces, all raising their glasses. My father looked confused, his smile watery, but he was in the picture. The caption, "Such a blessed Thanksgiving with our true family and dearest friends. So grateful for this perfect, peaceful home. It's just devastating when people from the past try to disrupt that peace. We had a scary incident today, a trespasser trying to force their way in, but we handled it with grace and kept the love flowing, praying for those who are lost and angry." She tagged me. She was painting a target on my back. The comments were already exploding. "Oh no, Delia, are you okay? So scary. Some people are just poison, sending you love." This was the second assault, the public one. My analyst brain took over completely. I was done with hotlines. I needed a shark. I opened my work contacts. I knew a few lawyers from compliance audits at Helix Point. I found the card for a firm in Portland, one known for being particularly aggressive in civil litigation. They had a 24/7 emergency line for corporate clients. I was a person, not a corporation, but this was an emergency. I called. I got an on-call attorney, a man whose voice was gravelly with interrupted sleep. "This line is for corporate retainer clients," he grumbled. "My name is Avery Calder. I am a clinical analyst. I have just been physically assaulted by my stepmother, who is actively slandering me online to cover it up. I have a medical report documenting the injury, and I have a high-fidelity audio recording of the entire incident, including the assault and her threats." There was a pause. The gravelly voice sharpened. "A recording?" "Yes, clear as day." "Email it to me, right now." He gave me his address. I sent the file. I sat there, staring at the screen, the cursor blinking. 10 minutes passed. My phone rang. It was him. "Ms. Calder, I have listened to the file. The sound of the impact is distinct. Her threat to call the police on you for trespassing after she struck you is extraordinarily clear evidence of malice. We have a case. Do not engage with your stepmother. Do not reply to her post. Do not speak to your father or any family member. Be at my office at 9 a.m. tomorrow. We are filing." Relief, cold and hard, washed over me. It wasn't just in my head. I did one last thing. I opened a new search. Best Private Investigators, Portland. I found a firm specializing in financial forensics and domestic cases. I filled out their intake form. Subject, Delia Cross. Objective, investigate financial activities, asset movement, and recent contractual agreements related to Graham Calder. I scheduled the consultation for the day after tomorrow. I finally stood up from the desk. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a deep, aching exhaustion. Delia had made a critical error. She had spent 5 years pushing me out with quiet, deniable microaggressions. She had relied on me being too polite, too tired, too heartbroken to fight back. She assumed I would absorb this humiliation, just like I had absorbed the dog's birthday party, the replaced photos, and the stolen passwords. But she had escalated. She put her hands on me. She left a mark, and she gave me a recording. My goal was no longer to be invited to Thanksgiving. Step 1 was complete. I had preserved my own safety. I had documented the truth. I had frozen her narrative before it could set. I was going to dismantle the lies she had built, one cold, hard fact at a time. I left my lawyer's office at 10:45 on Friday morning, the day after Thanksgiving. The city was quiet, hungover from the holiday. The meeting had been exactly what I needed. It was not a therapy session. It was a strategy session. My attorney, Ms. Hayes, was a woman who seemed to be constructed entirely of sharp angles and focused intent. She didn't offer me a tissue. She offered me a plan. She listened to the audio file once, her eyes closed. She studied the ER report. She looked at the screenshot of Delia's Facebook post, and a thin, cold smile touched her lips. "The post is a gift, Ms. Calder," she said, her voice crisp. "She's slandering you on a public forum, attempting to establish a false narrative to cover an assault. It demonstrates a clear consciousness of guilt." She laid it out for me. We were fighting on two fronts. Front 1, the assault, the physical act. Front 2, the financial and medical control, the exploitation of my father. "The slap is our way in," Ms. Hayes said, tapping the medical report with a pen. "It's the leverage. It gets us the emergency protection order. But the financial and medical inquiries, that is how we end this. Your goal for the next 48 hours is to build the case. Delia's world is built on stories. Yours will be built on paper." I went home, my apartment, my clean, quiet, one-bedroom fortress. Felt like a command center. I did not cry. I did not rage. I worked. My first move was data security. I am a clinical analyst. I live by the rule. If it isn't backed up in 3 places, it doesn't exist. I set up a new, fully encrypted cloud server. I uploaded the audio file of the assault. I uploaded the high-resolution photographs of my bruised cheek taken at the ER. I uploaded the photos I took myself this morning, showing the dark, ugly, ring-shaped purple marks blooming under the skin. I uploaded every screenshot from the Calder Cross crew chat, my polite questions, their absolute silence. I uploaded the screenshot of Delia's Facebook post, complete with all 112 comments of syrupy, feigned sympathy. I set the system to auto-sync. If my laptop was destroyed, if my phone was stolen, the truth was already safe. Next, I created the truth file. I went to an office supply store and bought the largest, thickest 3-ring binder I could find, 5 inches. I slid the printed ER report into the first plastic sleeve. I began to build a master timeline. It did not start at Thanksgiving. It started 5 years ago, the day my mother died. Every replaced photograph, every canceled shared credit card, every time I was told my father was too busy to talk. This was not a diary. It was a log of systemic isolation. At noon, I made the call. The private investigator, Marcus Thorne. He was the man Ms. Hayes had recommended, the one she'd called a bloodhound. "What's the objective?" he grunted, his voice sounding like gravel. "My stepmother, Delia Cross," I said, my voice as cold and flat as his. "She has, I believe, established undue influence over my father, Graham Calder. I suspect financial exploitation. I need a complete workup." "That's a wide net." "I have specific starting points," I said, pulling up my own notes. "I need a check on all real estate holdings and any new liens or reverse mortgages on the Stonebrook property. I need a search for any LLCs opened in her name, or her daughter's, Brielle Cross, in the last 5 years. Most importantly, I need everything you can find on a contractor. Blue Lark Renovations." I heard him typing. "Blue Lark? That's specific." I saw a charge on my father's bank statement last spring, before she locked me out, a transfer of $20,000. The memo just said, "Renovations." The house didn't change. "I'll need a retainer," he said. "I've already wired it," I replied. "I want to know who cashed the check." While Thorne was digging into the money, I started on the medical front. Ms. Hayes had been clear. That power of attorney is the key. If he signed it under duress, or while incompetent, her entire legal framework collapses. I started with a known quantity. Dr. Miles, my father's physician for 20 years, the one Delia had fired because he was too old-fashioned. I called his office. The receptionist, Janice, had known me since I was a child. "Janice, hi, it's Avery Calder, Graham Calder's daughter." A heavy, sad sigh came through the line. "Avery, honey, it's good to hear your voice. I'm so sorry. We haven't seen your dad in, it must be 8 months now." "I know. Delia moved him to some concierge doctor. Janice, I have a critical legal question. Did Delia ever file a new updated health proxy or power of attorney with your office, one that removed me? Hold on. I heard the clacking of keys. No, I'm looking at the file. The only one we have on record is the original, signed by your mother and your father. Years ago, it lists your mother as primary and you as secondary. With your mother's passing, Avery, as far as this office is concerned, you are your father's legal health proxy. My hand tightened on the pen. She never superseded it. She just took him away, Janice said sadly. She said he was transferring care. We never got the records request from the new doctor, which was very strange. We're legally required to keep his file, but we're not treating him. A crack in the armor, a big one. My next call was to the Oregon Coalition for Aging and People with Disabilities. I spent 30 minutes on the phone with a case advocate, detailing the isolation, the changed passwords, the medication control, the new doctor, the renovations, and finally, the slap. Her voice was calm and furious. Ms. Calder, you are describing a textbook pattern of high-control financial and physical abuse of a vulnerable adult. The assault is the emergency, but the isolation is the crime. We can help you file a report with Adult Protective Services. APS, the acronym hung in the air. This was not a family drama anymore. This was a state-level intervention. After the call, I opened a folder on my laptop, a folder I hadn't touched in years, labeled simply Mom. Inside was a high-resolution scan of my mother's original, notarized will. I'd scanned it when I helped my father execute it, before Delia. I scrolled past the bequests of jewelry and furniture. I was looking for the property trusts, and I found it. Section 4, a protective clause, a detail my mother, in her infinite wisdom, had insisted upon. It stipulated that while my father had full use of the Stonebrook house and all related assets, any sale of the property, or any liquidation of assets over $50,000, required a secondary signature. Mine. A cold, victorious shiver went down my spine. Delia was trying to sell off land, but she couldn't, not without me. She just didn't know it yet. I had the paper. Now, I needed the witnesses. I drove back to Stonebrook, not to the house. I parked 3 streets away and walked to Mrs. Brandt's home, the neighbor who had texted me. She opened the door before I could knock. "Avery, dear," she whispered, pulling me inside. "Your face." "I'm okay. Mrs. Brandt, I need your help. You said you saw me arrive." "I did. I was watching the game. I saw you park. You were carrying that beautiful pie and those white lilies. You walked up to the door. You did not look angry, dear. You looked heavy." "And when I left?" 10 minutes later, you came out fast, holding your cheek. You didn't run. You were composed. You got in your car and left. Then Delia came out. She was not crying. Avery. She was furious, pacing the porch. Then she saw me in the window, and all of a sudden, the waterworks started. It was a performance. The neighbors across the street, the Millers, they have a doorbell camera, don't they? "Oh, yes," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "The high-tech one, always blinking." She walked across the street with me. Mr. Miller was in his garage. He was a man who hated neighborhood drama, but he respected Mrs. Brandt. "George," she said, "we need to see your camera footage from yesterday. Around 3 p.m., Avery's stepmother is telling stories." He grumbled, but he pulled out his phone. He scrolled, he found it, and he turned the phone to me. It was grainy, silent, and from a distance, but it was irrefutable. 3:04 p.m. My car arrives. 3:05 p.m. I walk up the path, pie in one hand, flowers in the other. I am calm. 3:06 p.m. I enter the house. 3:11 p.m. The door flies open. I am seen staggering backward, out of the threshold. My body language is defensive. My hand is on my face. 3:12 p.m. I walk, fast, to my car. I drive away. 3:15 p.m. Delia appears on the porch, followed by Brielle. She is gesturing wildly. She is not crying. She is yelling at the empty street. "I need that file, Mr. Miller," I said, my voice shaking just slightly. "It's evidence." He looked from me to Mrs. Brandt. He saw the bruise. He emailed me the clip on the spot. As we were leaving, Mrs. Brandt put her hand on my arm. "One more thing, Avery, about your father's medication. I've seen her, through her kitchen window. She doles out his pills, but I think she's misusing them. When he gets agitated, as she says, I've seen her give him an extra one of the little white ones, the ones for anxiety. She's doping him, dear, to keep him quiet." I just nodded, the last piece falling into place. I got back to my apartment and uploaded the video file. I added Mrs. Brandt's testimony to my truth file, dated and timed. My phone was buzzing, a flood of texts. Delia, Brielle, an aunt I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. "Avery, your father is heartbroken. How could you attack Delia like that? You need help." They had realized the Facebook post wasn't enough. They were moving to direct intimidation. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb. I did not reply. I would not engage in her narrative. My armor was silence. My weapons were facts. I emailed Ms. Hayes. "I have the doorbell camera footage. I have a witness to medication mismanagement. I have my mother's will, and I have the original, active medical proxy." Her reply came back in less than 5 minutes. "Good. I've scheduled the hearing. Monday, 8 a.m. We are filing for an emergency temporary protection order against Delia and a motion to freeze all of your father's assets pending an elder welfare check." Step 2 was complete. I was taking this entire rotten secret war and dragging it, kicking and screaming, into the public record. The weekend was a pressurized vacuum. I went to work on Friday. My cheek a landscape of purple and yellow, which I covered with thick concealer. I told my boss it was a cycling accident. He looked at me, looked at the bruise, and approved my request to work from home for a few days. My silence was absolute. My phone, which had exploded with texts from Delia, Brielle, and confused, flying monkey relatives, was on Do Not Disturb, its screen black. On Monday morning, Ms. Hayes filed our motions. The court moved with surprising speed. The emergency temporary protection order was granted by 10 a.m. Based on the medical report and the audio file, Delia would be served by that afternoon. She was legally barred from contacting me, coming near my apartment, or my workplace. The second motion, the emergency, temporary freeze on all of Graham Calder's assets, was granted an hour later. Ms. Hayes had argued successfully that my active original health proxy, combined with my mother's will, showed a clear protective interest, and that Delia's recent control was suspicious. The freeze was the battering ram. It gave Ms. Hayes subpoena power. It gave Marcus Thorne, the private investigator, his entry point. The paper trail, which Delia had so carefully curated, was now open for audit. The first report from Thorne landed in my encrypted email box on Tuesday. It was one name, Blue Lark Renovations. "It's a shell, Ms. Calder," Thorne said over the phone, his voice a flat, factual monotone. "Registered 3 years ago to a post office box in Beaverton. The director and sole agent is a man named Leonard Cross." I didn't know the name. "Who is he?" "Delia's first cousin. He has 2 prior convictions for contractor fraud in Washington and 1 for grand theft auto. He's not a contractor. He's a launderer." I looked at the old bank statement, the one I'd saved, showing the $20,000 transfer. "So the renovations?" "Never happened," Thorne said. "I ran the permit logs for your father's property. Nothing has been filed in 5 years. That $20,000 was a direct payment to her cousin. He likely kept $2,000 for his trouble and gave her $18,000 back in cash." My stomach didn't turn. It just solidified. It was a cold, hard nod of certainty. The next email from Thorne contained a PDF. "Found the new documents." I opened it. There it was, a durable power of attorney and an advanced healthcare directive. signed by my father, Graham Calder, 6 months ago. It revoked all previous directives and named Delia Cross as the sole, exclusive agent for all financial and medical decisions. I stared at the date. I knew that date. I checked my calendar, scrolling back. Of course, it was 2 days after my father's gallbladder surgery. He had been in the hospital, hooked up to a morphine drip, confused and weak. He wasn't competent, I said, my voice quiet. Look at the witness signature, Thorne said. I scrolled to the bottom, signed and witnessed by Jenna Malone, Delia's best friend, the yoga instructor, the other woman in the Turkey Day prep squad mug photo. She had brought in her own, biased witness to watch my father sign away his life while he was legally sedated. My original proxy, the one I'd found from Dr. Miles, was the one she was trying to paper over. While Ms. Hayes began the legal challenge to invalidate the fraudulent POA, Thorne and I followed the money. The asset freeze had unlocked the bank records from the last 24 months. It was a blizzard of small, systematic thefts. Every Thursday, like clockwork, a $500 cash withdrawal from my father's primary checking account. $500 every single week, for 2 years, over $50,000. I opened a different file. Delia's social media. I scrolled back, every Friday. A post. Delia at the animal shelter. Donating supplies. Delia at the homeless shelter. Serving food. Delia at a charity gala. Pledging support. She was building her brand as Stonebrook's local saint, funding her philanthropic image by skimming cash directly from my father's account. Then, a larger charge. $18,000, transferred to a high-end jeweler in Portland. I stared at the date. I remembered that day. My father had called me, sounding anxious. Avery, I don't know what's wrong with my head. Delia says I made a large transfer for her portfolio, but I don't remember it at all. I must be losing my mind. I had reassured him, told him he was just stressed. I didn't know I was helping her gaslight him. The charge was for a custom diamond tennis bracelet. But it was the next discovery that made my breath catch. Thorne found an old, forgotten account, a trust fund. The Elizabeth Calder Memorial Scholarship. My mother had set it up before she got sick. $50,000, earmarked to grow. The interest intended for a scholarship to a local high school student studying science. It had been her passion project. The account was empty. Delia had found it. Over the last year, she had systematically drained it, not in one lump sum, but in dozens of small $300 and $400 transfers, labeling them household expenses. She hadn't just stolen from my father. She had stolen my mother's legacy. She had stolen it to pay for, as Thorne discovered, Brielle's Art Institute tuition. There's more, Thorne said, his voice grim. The land deal. He explained, my mother's will, the one with the protective clause, blocked the sale of the main house and the surrounding land, but there was a separate parcel, a 10-acre plot of undeveloped woodland that was in a separate family trust. My mother's will required my signature for its sale. Delia found a loophole, Thorne said, or she tried to. He sent me the file, a partially executed contract of sale. Delia, using her fraudulent POA, was attempting to sell the 10-acre plot. The buyer was a newly formed LLC called BC Artistic Ventures. BC, I said. Brielle Cross. Yep, she was selling the land to her own daughter for $1, moving the asset out of the trust and into Brielle's name, where she could then sell it for its full market value, probably $500,000, and bypass your mother's will entirely. She just hadn't finalized it. The final pieces came not from Thorne, but from Ms. Hayes. The court had ordered discovery, and that included Delia's own emails and texts. First, the email, from Delia to her personal lawyer, dated 8 months ago. I've reviewed Graham's will, and it's not acceptable. He is not in his right mind when he insists on this fair split. How can we adjust the terms to reflect his true wishes? I want to ensure Avery receives only the sentimental items. She doesn't need his money. We do. We need to protect the new family. But the text message was the one that stopped my heart. It was the chain between Delia and Brielle, the night before Thanksgiving. Brielle: "She's going to show up. Mom, you know she is. She'll make a scene." Delia: "Let her. This is our chance. We just have to be strong." Brielle: "What if she brings up the money or Dad's memory?" Delia: "She won't get the chance. This is about public perception. If we push her out at Thanksgiving, if everyone sees her as the problem, public opinion is on our side. She'll be too humiliated to fight back. We just have to make her the aggressor." I read it twice. The slap wasn't an impulse. It wasn't a loss of control. It was a strategy. It was a premeditated act of public theater, designed to discredit me, to paint me as unstable and angry, so that when the financial crimes were finally discovered, no one would believe me. Thorne called one last time. "Ms. Calder, what I've found here. This is a multi-year, systematic pattern of elder financial abuse, undue influence, and fraud. This is beyond civil court. I am obligated to recommend you file a report with the State Department of Social Services and Adult Protective Services." "Do it," I said. Ms. Hayes confirmed the final step. "The judge has reviewed Thorne's preliminary report. The asset freeze is now ironclad. Delia is locked out of everything. She has no access to his accounts, his credit, or his properties." I sat at my desk. The truth binder was now 3 binders, thick and heavy with bank statements, legal filings, emails, and screenshots. I looked at the very first document I had filed. The ER report from Thanksgiving. My face swollen. The imprint of her rings. I finally understood. The slap wasn't the attack. It was the smokescreen. It was the loud, violent, public distraction designed to make me look in the wrong direction. She wanted me to fight her about a family dinner. She never, ever wanted me to look at the paper. The real game wasn't about who got a seat at the table. It was about who controlled my father's signature, who controlled his assets, and who would be left to pick up the pieces. And she had just lost. The courtroom was an exercise in controlled breathing. It was small, suffocating, the air thick with the smell of floor wax and old bound paper. It was Monday, the first business day after the long weekend, and I had been sitting on a hard wooden bench since 8:30 in the morning, my truth binder, a heavy 3-ringed brick on my lap. Delia was already there. She had been served the summons at 7 a.m. She looked, for the first time since I had known her, completely undone. Her normally perfect blonde hair was pulled back in a severe, messy knot. Her face was pale and puffy, her eyes red-rimmed and furious. She was wearing an expensive-looking silk blouse, but it was wrinkled, as if she had slept in it. She sat 2 rows ahead of me, next to a man in a pinstripe suit who looked agitated and was whispering furiously into her ear. She kept shaking her head, her gaze fixed forward, refusing to look at me. "All rise," the bailiff called. We stood, the judge, a woman with sharp features and even sharper eyes, swept in and took her seat. She looked at the docket. In the matter of Calder versus Cross, petition for an emergency protection order and ex parte motion for temporary relief. My lawyer, Ms. Hayes, stood. She was the opposite of Delia. She was ironed, pressed, and perfect. Her voice was a calm, clinical instrument. "Your Honor, we are here on an emergency basis. My client, Avery Calder, was the victim of a domestic assault on Thanksgiving Day. We have filed the medical report from St. Jude's emergency room, documenting the injuries sustained." Delia's lawyer, Mr. Vance, shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is a gross mischaracterization. It was a family misunderstanding. Ms. Calder showed up uninvited and—" The judge cut him off with a single, raised hand. "Counsel, I have read the initial petition. I have seen the photographs. This is an emergency hearing. Ms. Hayes, you may proceed." Ms. Hayes nodded. "Your Honor, we have more than the medical report." She gestured to the court's audio-visual tech. "We have an audio recording of the incident. I watched Delia's back. She went rigid. Her head whipped around to stare at her lawyer, her eyes wide with panic. He looked just as surprised. "Permission to play the relevant 30 seconds, Your Honor." "Granted." The courtroom filled with the sound, my voice, low and steady. "I just want to put these flowers on Mom's table." Delia's voice, sharp and cold. "Your mother is gone. This is my house." Then, the sickeningly clear sound, the shatter of glass, the scuffle, and the sharp, explosive crack of her hand hitting my face. A collective, muffled gasp came from the two other people in the gallery. The judge's expression didn't change, but her gaze hardened. "Ms." Hayes let the audio play for another 5 seconds, capturing the ringing silence. And her final words, "Your Honor," she said, letting the audio continue. Delia's voice, low and venomous. "Get out of my house right now, before I call the police for trespassing." Delia's lawyer was now the color of old parchment. "And Exhibit C, Ms." Hayes continued, her voice relentless. "The doorbell camera footage from the neighbor across the street. It shows my client arriving calmly, and it shows her staggering from the house, holding her face, at the exact time of the assault." The judge watched the grainy, silent video on her monitor. She looked at the photos. She looked at the medical report. Then she looked at Delia. A long, cold stare. "The petition for a temporary order of protection is granted," the judge said, her voice final. "Ms. Cross, you are to have no contact with Ms. Avery Calder. None. You will not call, text, email, or speak to her. You will not contact her through any third party. You will remain at least 100 yards from her person, her residence, and her place of work. This order is effective immediately." Delia finally broke. "But my husband, her father, he needs me." "Which brings us to the second motion. Your Honor," Ms. Hayes said, not missing a beat. "We have filed for an emergency welfare check and a temporary freeze on all assets belonging to Graham Calder, based on strong evidence of elder financial abuse and undue influence." Delia's lawyer was on his feet again, sputtering. "Outrageous! This is slander! Ms. Cross is a loving wife." "A loving wife," Ms. Hayes countered, "who had her husband, while heavily sedated after major surgery, sign a new power of attorney, one that voided a previous, long-standing directive. A loving wife who has been systematically draining his accounts, including a memorial trust, through a shell corporation run by her convicted felon cousin." She placed the Blue Lark renovations file, the bank statements, and the fraudulent POA on the desk. The judge's face was now thunderous. She read the summaries Hayes had prepared. "It is so ordered," the judge declared. "Effective immediately. A temporary injunction is placed on all assets, holdings, and credit lines held by Graham Calder, Ms. Cross. You are hereby barred from initiating any financial transaction on his behalf. The court is freezing these accounts pending a full hearing." Delia let out a sound, a choked, strangled sob of pure rage. Her mask of poise and victimhood had been ripped away, and all that was left was the raw, ugly greed. We walked out of the courtroom. Ms. Hayes and I, we didn't look back. The victory was short-lived. Delia, now legally muzzled, did the next best thing. She unleashed her daughter. By that afternoon, Brielle's Instagram and Facebook were on fire. It was a long, rambling, typo-filled screed, a photo of her and Delia, crying, captioned, "My mother is a saint, and my stepsister is a monster. Avery attacked my mom on Thanksgiving and is now lying to the court to try and steal my father's money. She faked her injuries. We are the victims. Please pray for us." My phone lit up with notifications. My hand was shaking. The urge to reply, to post the audio file, to post the pictures of my bruised face was overwhelming. I called Ms. Hayes. "She's slandering me. Brielle is—" "Do not reply," Ms. Hayes said, her voice sharp as steel. "Do not engage. Your silence is a pillar of strength. Let her scream into the void. You have the court order. She has an Instagram story. A pause. I, however, am sending Ms. Brielle Cross a cease and desist letter via courier. It will be delivered to her apartment this evening. It will inform her that she is now a party to a civil suit for libel, and that any further public statements will be added to the petition for damages. The post vanished less than 2 hours later. The court order triggered the next, crucial step. The report I had filed with Adult Protective Services was now escalated. On Tuesday, they made their move. A caseworker, a woman named Ms. Ramirez, and a nurse practitioner made an unannounced visit to the Stonebrook house. Delia, furious and trapped, was legally required to let them in. Ms. Ramirez called me after the visit. Ms. Calder, we've completed the initial assessment. Ms. Cross was uncooperative. She attempted to remain in the room while we spoke with your father. And, is he okay? We separated them per protocol, she said, her voice careful. Your father, Mr. Calder, seems confused. He's physically stable, but his memory of recent events is very poor. He kept asking if he was in trouble. She paused, and I heard her flip a page in her notes. This part is important. When he was alone with the nurse, he seemed to relax. He said, and I quote, "Delia is so stressed. I just try to be quiet. He asked about you. He was worried you were angry at him. He also confirmed he has no memory of the week of his gallbladder surgery." That was the key. Ms. Hayes used the APS report to depose the concierge doctor Delia had hired. Under oath, faced with the APS findings, the doctor admitted the truth. The cocktail of post-surgical narcotics and anti-anxiety medication my father was on would have, without question, significantly compromised his cognitive function and legal capacity at the time he signed the new power of attorney. With that testimony, the fraudulent POA was nullified. The court, now fully engaged, moved to the next logical step. The judge, seeing the clear conflict of interest, was not going to hand control of my father's life from Delia to me. She issued a new order. The court was appointing an independent evaluator, a guardian ad litem, a neutral, third-party attorney whose only job was to investigate the entire situation: my father's health, his finances, Delia's behavior, and my claims, and report back to the court with one recommendation: what was in the best interest of Graham Calder. Delia, of course, was fighting back in the only way she knew how. She hired a local public relations consultant. Suddenly, whispers started emerging, not from her, but from sources close to the family. They tried to plant a story with the Stonebrook Gazette, painting me as the greedy, estranged daughter trying to steal her father's estate. It backfired, spectacularly. The Gazette reporter, a young woman who actually did her homework, checked the public court filings. She saw the temporary protection order. She saw the words assault, financial elder abuse, and emergency injunction. The newspaper declined to run Delia's story. Instead, the reporter called Ms. Hayes, who gave a very dry, very precise no comment. The community, which Delia had cultivated so carefully, began to talk. The whispers changed. Why would a judge issue a restraining order? Why was Delia's access to her husband's money frozen? The story Delia had tried to plant had morphed. The narrative was no longer about a family spat. It smelled of a crime. The first shot was fired, and it had hit the target. Delia was cut off from her money, legally barred from me, and now being investigated by the state. She was cornered. I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the end of the beginning. She was quiet, for now, but she was preparing her counterattack. Delia's attack, when it came, was not a frontal assault. It was a feint, wrapped in piety. The invitation arrived via her lawyer, a carefully worded email to Ms. Hayes proposing an informal, off-the-record mediation. Delia was, her lawyer wrote, heartbroken by this division and wished to resolve things as a family. The proposed location was the masterstroke of her performance, the fellowship hall of the Stonebrook Presbyterian Church. She wants an audience, I said to Ms. Hayes, my voice flat. No, Ms. Hayes replied, her eyes scanning the email. She wants a stage. She wants to be able to say she met us in a church, that she came in good faith. It's PR, not law. We'll go. We'll listen. We will concede nothing. We arrived exactly on time. I wore my darkest, most severe suit. Ms. Hayes was, as always, a picture of lethal competence. We walked into the large, empty hall. It smelled of coffee and old hymnals. Delia was sitting at a long folding table, a single, untouched cup of tea in front of her. She had come alone. She rose as we entered, and the transformation was breathtaking. She was the woman I'd first met, the warm, grieving, empathetic widow. Her eyes were red, her hands were clasped at her waist, and she was wearing a modest, dove-gray dress. She looked, in a word, broken. "Avery," she breathed, her voice thick with manufactured tears. "Thank you for coming. Thank you." She didn't look at Ms. Hayes. "We're here, Delia," I said. Ms. Hayes placed 2 briefcases on the table, and we sat opposite her. The chasm of linoleum felt a mile wide. I don't know how this all got so ugly," she began, her hands fluttering. "This isn't us, Avery, your father. He's just devastated. I am here because I love him, and I love you, and I want to fix this. I want to make this right. You can make this right by returning the $140,000 you've siphoned from my father's accounts, for a start." "Ms." Hayes said, her voice a cold splash of water. Delia flinched, as if struck. "Money! Is that what this is about? I knew it. I knew you were concerned about money." She reached into her bag and pulled out a sheaf of papers. "I knew you were having financial trouble." She slid a document across the table. It was a bank statement, my bank statement, from the previous year. It showed a withdrawal of $8,000. "I have been protecting your father from this," Delia said, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "I've been so worried about you, borrowing this much money. Your father was so hurt you came to him, but I told him, 'Graham, she's our daughter. We must help her.'" I stared at the paper, then I looked at Ms. Hayes. A slow, dangerous smile was on my lawyer's face. "Ms. Cross," Ms. Hayes said, leaning forward, "that is a copy of an invoice for $8,200. It's the one Ms. Calder paid, from her personal savings, to Stonebrook Roofing and Repair last October, after a storm damaged his roof, the one your insurance failed to cover." She slid our own copy, the one from my truth binder, across the table. "You're not accusing her of borrowing money. You are admitting she has been paying for the upkeep of an estate you've been actively liquidating. Thank you for this." Delia's face went blank. The mask had slipped. She hadn't expected the receipts. She'd assumed, like she always did, that I was too disorganized, too emotional, to keep my own records. She recovered quickly, pushing the papers away, her eyes flashing. The tears were gone. "This is what I'm talking about. This fighting. This is what's killing your father." She leaned in, her voice now a desperate hiss. "What do you want, Avery? Really? Just tell me. Do you want money? Is that it? You feel left out? We can fix that, right now. Just name a number." She was offering me a bribe, in a church. "This is not a negotiation, Ms. Cross," Ms. Hayes said, already closing her briefcase. "It's a restoration. We are not interested in a gift. We are here to see you charged for theft, fraud, and elder abuse." That's when I noticed it. On the bench, next to Delia's bag, a smartphone, lying screen down. It was Brielle's phone. I recognized the gaudy, jewel-encrusted case. A tiny pinprick of red light was reflected on the polished wooden armrest beside it. She was recording. Brielle was somewhere in the building, in the next room, most likely, piping in audio. They had been planning to catch me saying yes to the money. They wanted to edit the tape, to splice my words, to make me the extortionist. I pushed my chair back, standing up. "We're done here. Delia, you have nothing to offer me. The court will handle this." "Avery, wait," she called out, her voice a desperate shriek. "You're destroying this family." "No," I said, turning at the door, my voice clear and loud for the microphone. "You did, and I have the proof." We walked out into the cold, bright sunshine. Ms. Hayes was almost giddy. "She tried to bribe you. She brought a fraudulent document, and she attempted to illegally record you. This is not a good day for her." The desperation, now that it was unmasked, escalated. The next day, an email landed in my inbox. Not from Delia. The protection order was still in place. It was from her new, separate email account, the one she used for her charity work. The subject line was, "Your father's legacy." The email was short, masterpiece of subtle intimidation. "Avery, I am writing to you not as a stepmother, but as the only person left who is protecting Graham's reputation. This public fight, the things you are accusing me of, they don't just hurt me, they hurt him. People are talking. They are saying he is incompetent, that he is a fool, that he let his scheming wife ruin him. You are turning his entire life's work into a joke. You are dragging his name through the mud. If you love him, you will stop this. You will let this be handled privately. Think of his honor. Think of his name." I didn't reply. I didn't feel a thing. I just clicked forward, sent it to Ms. Hayes, and added one line. "This feels like an attempt to intimidate a witness." Ms. Hayes filed it with the court less than an hour later. The thrashing had begun. That night, at 2:17 in the morning, I got a call from Marcus Thorne. "You're not going to believe this," he said, his voice wide awake. "We got a hit, a big one, the storage facility where your father's new doctor keeps his archives, the physical files, not just the digital ones." "What happened?" Silent alarm. Someone jimmied the lock on the C-section. For Calder. They didn't get in. Alarm company was too fast. But the night manager got a look at the vehicle peeling out of the lot. "They got a camera," I whispered, my heart hammering. Better. A high-def camera on the exit gate caught the plate clear as day, a dark blue Ford Expedition, registered to a 1. Blue Lark Renovations. Thorne filed the police report. The Stonebrook PD, now armed with a court order and an APS investigation, finally took it seriously. They paid Delia a visit. She denied everything. Of course, she was, according to the police report. Shocked and appalled, she had never heard of Blue Lark Renovations. She had no idea who Leonard Cross was. She claimed it was all a setup, that I was framing her. She lied too hard and too fast. The attempted break-in, combined with the threatening email, was all the judge needed. The hammer came down. Given the clear evidence of witness intimidation, the judge wrote in his new order, and a blatant attempt to destroy evidence, the court is expanding the scope of the injunction. It was no longer just a freeze, it was a full-scale forensic audit. The order required Delia to surrender, within 24 hours, every credit card, every bank card, and every store loyalty card in her possession. It called for a full inventory of the house, including all liquid assets and jewelry. She was, in effect, placed on a cash-only allowance, supervised by the court. The real blow, however, was happening in silence. The guardian ad litem, the court-appointed evaluator, was a gentle, grandmotherly woman named Mrs. Peterson, and she had, unlike Delia, a truly warm smile. She had been visiting my father, alone, for 3 days. "Ms. Hayes," got the call from her. "Ms. Hayes," Mrs. Peterson began, her voice full of a quiet sadness. "I have my report. Mr. Calder has been very forthcoming. He was terrified of his wife. He said he felt like he was walking on eggshells in his own home." And then, the sentence that broke the case wide open. He told me, and I have it in my sworn notes, I don't remember signing those papers. The ones about the money. I was in the hospital. I was so fuzzy. I could barely see the page. And when I asked him why he signed, he said, Delia held my hand. She was crying. She said it was to protect us from the taxes, to protect the family. She told me to trust her, so I did. I was just so tired. The moral veneer. The paint Delia had so carefully applied had been sandblasted away. Underneath was just the raw, rotting wood. Her claws were out, and she was scratching at bare walls. I stayed calm. I kept working. I kept logging the data. I didn't need to be fast. I didn't need to be loud. I just needed to stand still and let the law, which she had so arrogantly dismissed, finally wrap its chains around her. The narrative began to pivot. It was no longer just my story, my word against hers, my audio file against her lies, the foundation of Delia's world, which she had built in silence and secrecy, had been cracked open by the court order, and now, through those cracks, the light was flooding in, carried by other people, a small, quiet, and suddenly brave alliance of the truth. The first was Maria. She had been our family's housekeeper for 20 years, coming in twice a week. My mother had adored her. Delia, upon her arrival, had cut her hours and then, 6 months ago, had fired her, claiming she was too expensive. She found me. She came to my apartment on a Saturday morning, clutching a worn, spiral-bound notebook. She was terrified, her hands shaking, but her eyes were resolute. "Miss Avery," she said, her voice a low, heavy whisper. "I was always loyal to your mother and to your father, but this new woman." She opened the notebook. It wasn't a diary. It was a log. Maria, methodical and precise, had written down everything, not just her cleaning schedule, but her observations. "She is a bad woman," Maria said, her finger tracing a line of neat, cursive script. "She would wait for me to be dusting the study, and she would bring Mr. Graham papers, always in the morning, when he was, foggy." I read the entry she was pointing to. July 12th, 10:30 a.m. Mrs. Cross brought Mr. Graham 3 papers. He said, "My hand is shaking. Delia, I can't read this." She held his hand, put the pen in it, and guided it. She said, "It's just the insurance. Darling, sign." He was dizzy. He told me so after she left. There were dozens of entries just like it. August 1st, she brought him a bank paper. He asked for his glasses. She said, "You don't need them, Graham. Just sign here." September 22nd, she gave him an extra white pill with his orange juice. He was asleep in his chair by 11. It was a meticulous, contemporaneous record of duress. It was, as Ms. Hayes later called it, the gold standard of third-party evidence. Maria had, without knowing it, documented the entire campaign of cognitive and legal abuse. Then came the neighbors. Mrs. Brandt, my first witness, had spoken to the others. Mr. Miller, the man with the doorbell camera, gave a sworn statement. But it was the family next door, the Harts, who had been there for 30 years, who provided the narrative. They gave their testimony to Mrs. Peterson, the guardian ad litem. "Oh, we knew," Mrs. Hart said, her voice clear in the transcript. "Delia told us, over the fence, that Avery was having a breakdown and was no longer welcome. She said it with that sad, worried voice she uses. She told us that if we saw Avery near the house, we should call her, not the police, so she could handle it privately. She was isolating that girl. She had been blocking her from her own home for at least 6 months before that Thanksgiving. We always thought it was strange." The isolation was now a confirmed multi-witness fact. The linchpin, however, was Mr. Davies. He had been my father's accountant for a decade, a precise, unfun man who my father trusted implicitly. Delia had fired him a year ago, claiming he was out of touch and that she was moving to a more aggressive financial advisor. Mr. Davies, it turned out, was furious. not just at being fired, but at what he had seen. When Miss Hayes contacted him, he didn't just agree to testify, he volunteered, as an expert witness, to dismantle Delia's financial statements. "She's an amateur," he fumed, in our first meeting, his face pink with indignation. She thought she was so clever, moving money in small batch transfers, but her digital hygiene is appalling. She left tracks everywhere. He was the one who, with Marcus Thorne, built the final, beautiful, terrible map of the money. He proved, with color-coded charts and timelines, that the $20,000 renovation payment to Blue Lark Renovations had been cashed by Leonard Cross, and that, 2 days later, $10,000 in cash was used as a down payment on a new luxury SUV for Delia. He traced the other half. The remaining $10,000 had been transferred from Leonard Cross's account to a holding company, BC Artistic Ventures, Brielle's shell. That $10,000, in turn, had been used to purchase a 5% stake in a new, absurdly expensive art gallery in Portland. She wasn't just stealing, Mr. Davies explained, his finger jabbing the chart. She was investing. She was using Mr. Calder's money to buy her daughter a new career as a gallery owner. It's fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy, plain and simple. Even the church, Delia's chosen stage, turned on her, the pastor, a kind man who had been deeply troubled by the court filings, provided Ms. Hayes with the entire email chain. It was Delia, in her philanthropic role, boasting about the Elizabeth Calder Memorial Scholarship. "We are so proud to announce we've raised over $30,000 this year," she had written in one email. "Thank you for all your support." Mr. Davies cross-referenced that email with the bank statements. On the exact day she'd sent that email, she had made the final withdrawal, draining the last $1,000 from the scholarship fund to pay for a catering bill for one of her charity luncheons. The medical report from the court-appointed doctor was the coldest, cruelest cut. He reviewed my father's file from the new concierge doctor. He reviewed Maria's logbook. His conclusion was damning. The patient's prescription for lorazepam was altered, the dosage was doubled, and the frequency changed from as needed for panic to twice daily, with meals. This was done without a precipitating event, and is medically contraindicated with his other medications. This regimen would, in a man of his age and condition, almost certainly induce a state of chronic confusion, lethargy, and memory impairment. She wasn't just keeping him quiet, she was chemically disabling him. But the final, fatal blow came from my mother. It came from her grave, in the form of her will. Ms. Hayes had been focused on it for days. "It's here. Avery, I knew it. She was smarter than all of them." She pointed to a clause. Section 4, Clause B, the lock clause. As I'd come to think of it, I'd read it, but I hadn't understood its power. It read, "Any alteration, sale, or leveraging of the primary estate or its core assets, as defined in Appendix A, requires the signatory consent of my daughter, Avery Elizabeth Calder, executed in the presence of a notarized, independent, non-familial witness. Delia's lawyer, the one she hired," Ms. Hayes said, her voice shaking with a lawyer's pure joy at finding a loophole, "was an idiot. He filed a revised will for your father, the one Delia had him sign, the one that left you sentimental items, but he filed it as a new document. He didn't, and couldn't, legally dissolve the terms of the trust your mother set up. That trust governs the assets. Her will trumps his new, fraudulent one. This clause, this lock clause, is still active. It has always been active." Delia's attempts to sell the land to Brielle for $1, her attempts to get a reverse mortgage, her renovations, all of it was null and void. She had never, not for 1 second, actually had the power she thought she did. Ms. Hayes filed the motion immediately, petitioning the court to recognize the supremacy of my mother's original will and to nullify every single financial action Delia had taken since my father's surgery. This was the end of the civil fight and the beginning of the criminal one. The Stonebrook police, armed with the Blue Lark investigation, the pharmacist's report on the medication, and the clear evidence of signature forgery, had opened a full felony investigation. Delia Cross was no longer just a civil defendant. She was a criminal suspect, being investigated for elder financial abuse, forgery, and grand larceny. The court, on the guardian ad litem's emergency recommendation, had my father moved. He was out of the Stonebrook house, away from Delia, and in a quiet, neutral, residential care facility, a place for observation and demedication. I was allowed to see him. I went on a Sunday. The protection order kept Delia a football field away. He was sitting in a sunroom, looking out at a garden. He was thinner, and his hands trembled. But his eyes were clearer than I had seen them in years. The fog was lifting. He saw me, and his face crumpled. He didn't speak for a full minute. He just held my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Avery," he whispered, and his voice was his own. "Aves, I'm so sorry." I just held his hand. I didn't know what to say. I remember that day, Thanksgiving. He looked down, his shame a physical weight. I was in the corner. I stood there. I let you take the hit for me. I was so scared of her. I'm so sorry, baby. I felt the sting behind my eyes, but I did not cry. I squeezed his hand, a hard, firm grip. "I know, Dad. It's okay. I know." She built a cage around me, Aves, a glass cage. I could see out, but I couldn't get out. "I know," I said again, my voice stronger now. "And I am going to get you out. I promise. She's not going to hurt you ever again." The night before the final hearing, the biggest storm of the season hit Portland. Rain wasn't just falling. It was a physical, driving force, lashing against the windows of my apartment. It was a solid wall of sound, a roar of white noise. Inside, my small kitchen was the warmest place in the world. It was not a celebration, it was a muster. I had roasted a chicken. I had baked a simple pumpkin pie, the kind you make from a can, not the beautiful artisanal one I dropped on the floor at Stonebrook. It was food, not a statement. My guests were my alliance. Mrs. Brandt, my neighbor, sat at my small dining table, holding a teacup in both hands. Mr. Davies, the accountant, was looking stiff in a sweater vest, but he was eating, and Ms. Hayes, my lawyer, was sitting in my armchair, a plate balanced on her knees, a thick binder of her own open beside her. "So, let's review," Ms. Hayes said, her voice cutting cleanly through the sound of the rain. "One last time, Mrs. Brandt, what will you say tomorrow?" Mrs. Brandt, her spine straighter than I'd ever seen it, looked up. "I will say what I saw. I will say I saw Avery arrive, calm, with a pie and flowers. I will say I saw her leave, 10 minutes later, holding her face, and I will say I saw Delia Cross come out onto her porch, look around, and then, when she saw me in my window, she put her hands to her face and began to perform." "Good." Ms. Hayes nodded. "Mr. Davies?" "Mr." Davies put down his fork, his eyes lighting up with the fury of a man who has found a profound, offensive error in the math. "I will present the flowcharts. I will show the court, in plain, undeniable, color-coded graphics, how every dollar from the renovation account, which I will prove was a shell, was funneled directly to an LLC, which I will prove is owned by Brielle Cross, which was then used to purchase a stake in a private for-profit art gallery. I will state, as an expert, that this is not a family loan. It is not creative accounting. It is a textbook case of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, papered over with forged documents." "Excellent," Ms. Hayes said. "Maria, the housekeeper, has already given her sworn deposition. Her written log of the medication abuse is already in the record. The doctor's report on the chemical sedation is Exhibit A." We were a quiet, strange, and absolutely furious army. We were bound not by love, but by a shared, obsessive belief in the facts. The intercom buzzed, sharp and loud. It was Marcus Thorne, the investigator. I let him up. He didn't come in for chicken. He stood in my doorway, rain dripping from his long coat. A man who seemed to exist only in shadows. He was holding a single, heavy-duty USB drive, the kind with a metal casing.
"This is the final package," he said, his voice a low rumble. "We got it all."
He handed me the drive. It was warm from his hand. "What's on it?" I asked, though Ms. Hayes already knew. "Everything," he said, and I saw the barest hint of a smile on his face. "It's the security camera footage from the medical storage facility, the high-definition footage, showing the Blue Lark SUV and a clear shot of Leonard Cross trying to jimmy the lock. It's the complete bank statement from Blue Lark, showing the single deposit from your father and the immediate, systematic withdrawals by Delia and Brielle. And it's the email server, the full mirror, every email Delia ever sent to her lawyer, to Brielle, to her cousin. It was the whole war, the whole 5-year campaign, on a single 2-inch piece of metal." "Thank you, Marcus," I said. He just nodded. "Go get her, Ms. Calder," and he was gone, dissolving back into the rain. I closed the door and put the USB drive on the table. It sat there, next to the pie, a small, dark, dense object that held all the power in the room. My guests left soon after. We had said all we needed to say. They were ready. I was ready. I cleaned the dishes, the simple, domestic act, a comfort. When the kitchen was spotless, I looked at my counter. There, in a simple glass vase, was a new bouquet of white lilies and silver dollar eucalyptus. I had bought them that morning. They were for my mother. They were for me. They were to replace what had been shattered, to prove that I could put them on my own table, in my own home, and no one could ever strike them from my hands again. I went to my desk and opened my notebook. The truth binder. I turned to a fresh page. I wrote down 3 lines, the only ones that mattered to me now. No revenge with violence, no revenge with anger, only with the truth. A truth so large and so well documented that no one can ever hide from it again. As I closed the book, my phone buzzed on the desk. It was not a text. It was an email. From Ms. Hayes. The subject line, "Final offer." I opened it. It was a forwarded message from Delia's lawyer, the official, legal, 11th hour Hail Mary. It was a confidential settlement offer, a number, larger than I had ever seen, a sum of 6 figures. In exchange, I was to drop the civil suit. I was to file a motion to dismiss the criminal referrals. I was to sign a full, ironclad, permanent non-disclosure agreement. I was to take the money, and I was to be silent, forever. I read it twice. She was trying to buy the truth. She was trying to put a price tag on the audio file, on the slap, on my mother's stolen legacy, on my father's drugged mind. She thought, in the end, that I was just like her, that I had a number. I picked up the phone and called Ms. Hayes. "I assume you've seen it," she said. Her voice was tired. "I have." "It's a significant offer. Avery, it is my legal duty to tell you that. It's life-changing money, and a trial. A trial is never a guarantee. It's a risk." "Does it stop the APS investigation?" I asked. "No, that's a state matter, but it would complicate it. Our testimony would be sealed." "Does it give my father his mind back? Does it give my mother her scholarship back?" Ms. Hayes was silent for a beat. "No," she said, her voice softer now. "It doesn't." "Then I have no interest in it. Please, tell him. Tell her lawyer. No." "Are you sure? We can counter. We can ask for—" "I am sure," I said. I looked at the new lilies, their white petals perfect under the warm light. "Please, just send my reply." "What would you like your reply to be?" I thought for a moment. I thought about the slap. I thought about the look of triumph in her eyes. "Just 1 sentence," I said. I clicked reply on the email chain to Ms. Hayes, so she had it in writing. Tomorrow, the court will hear everything. I sent it. I shut down the computer. I went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. The bruise on my cheek was gone. After all these weeks, it had finally faded. It was just a faint, yellowish shadow, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. But I knew where the bones had been hit. I knew where her rings had made their mark. The shame, which had been so hot and sharp that first night, that was gone too. It had burned away, leaving something harder in its place. Something that wouldn't break. My backbone. My phone buzzed one last time on the counter. I glanced at it. A new Instagram story from Brielle. I didn't even have to open it. The preview was clear enough. It was her, holding a champagne flute, laughing in some bar. The caption, "Some people are just born to lose. Can't wait for tomorrow's drama." She'd added a winking, tongue-out emoji. I just stared at it. I felt nothing. No anger, no hurt. It was the digital squeal of a cornered, panicked animal. I turned the phone over. Screen down. I let her have her last, stupid, pointless word. I went to bed. The rain was a lullaby, a drumbeat washing the city clean. And for the first time in what felt like 5 years, I slept. It was a deep, dark, dreamless sleep. My alarm went off at 6 a.m. The rain had stopped. The city was quiet, washed clean, the sky a pale, sharp gray. I got up, I showered, I made my coffee. I didn't rush. I was an analyst, preparing for a presentation. I went to my closet and pulled out the suit Ms. Hayes had told me to wear. Black, severe, professional. And underneath, I put on my mother's dark blue blazer. It was old, the silk lining a bit worn, but it fit perfectly. It was my armor. I picked up my keys. I picked up the USB drive. I put them in my pocket. I walked out of my apartment, my heels clicking in the quiet morning hallway. I had a promise to keep, a promise to my father, to my mother, and to the woman in the mirror with the faded bruise. This was not revenge. This was a closing entry. This was the final, public logging of the data. This was the end. The courtroom was not the quiet, empty space of the emergency hearing. It was full. Every bench was packed. This was, I realized, theater. And the entire town of Stonebrook wanted a ticket. Delia was in the front row, seated not 10 feet from me. She had abandoned the soft, broken bird act from the church. Today, she was a professional. She wore a severe, expensive-looking navy blue suit, her hair pulled back in a flawless, tight bun. She was even smiling, a bright, hard, public relations smile, for the local reporter in the back row. But the smile was stiff. It was a mask, and it was cracking at the edges. Ms. Hayes stood. She was not a performer. She was an executioner. "Your Honor," she began, her voice crisp and clear. "We are not here to argue about a family misunderstanding. We are here to present a timeline of a crime." She signaled the court technician. This case began on Thanksgiving Day. 4 weeks ago, it began with a physical assault. My face appeared on the large screens in the courtroom. The photographs from the St. Jude's emergency room, the red welt, the purple crescent-shaped bruises from her rings. A collective, quiet gasp went through the gallery. Delia's smile froze. "We submit Exhibit A," Ms. Hayes continued, "the medical report, and Exhibit B." The sound that filled the courtroom was electric. It was the audio from my watch, my voice. "I just want to put these flowers on Mom's table." And then hers. "Your mother is gone." And then, the sound. The sickening, sharp crack of her hand connecting with my face. It was violent, ugly, and undeniable. And finally, Exhibit C. The doorbell footage from the house across the street. Time-stamped to the exact minute. It shows my client arriving calmly, with a pie and flowers. It shows her staggering, in retreat, from the front door, her hand to her face, 10 minutes later. The foundation was set. Ms. Hayes began to build the walls. Ms. Ramirez, the caseworker from Adult Protective Services, took the stand. Her testimony was dry and devastating. We found Mr. Calder in a highly controlled environment. We found evidence of medical mismanagement. The prescription for his anxiolytics had been altered in a way that, in our opinion, was designed to create a compliant, confused state. Then Mr. Davies, the accountant, took the stand. He was practically vibrating with professional indignation. He put up his color-coded charts. "As you can see, Your Honor," he said, pointing a laser at the screen, "the $20,000 renovation fee paid to Blue Lark Renovations, which we have proven is a shell company." "Objection!" Delia's lawyer, a new man I didn't recognize, jumped to his feet. "Conjecture!" "Overruled," the judge, a woman with zero patience, said without looking up. "He is a forensic accountant. Counsel, he is allowed to count. Continue, Mr. Davies." "The money," Mr. Davies said, clicking to the next slide, "was siphoned, within 48 hours, into two separate accounts, $10,000 for a vehicle down payment by Ms. Cross, the other $10,000 into BC Artistic Ventures, an LLC owned by Brielle Cross, which she then used to purchase a 5% stake in the Phoenix Art Gallery." He put up a final slide. It showed Delia's charity luncheon invoices, side by side with her social media posts. The invoices for these events, which Ms. Cross claimed were donations, were in fact paid for by the Elizabeth Calder Memorial Scholarship Fund, a fund she drained to zero. The doctor who had evaluated my father, the court-appointed one, had his video deposition played. Mr. Calder's cognitive function was severely compromised at the time of the surgery. In my professional opinion, he was incapable of understanding or legally consenting to the complex new power of attorney documents he was given. The process was invalid. The judge held up a document, a copy of my mother's will. The court also recognizes the original, notarized will of Elizabeth Calder, which was filed with this court 15 years ago. I am reading from Section 4, Clause B, the lock clause. It stipulates that all major asset transfers require a secondary, independent, notarized signature from Ms. Avery Calder. He looked up, his eyes sweeping over Delia. A clause that was, notably, forgotten in the revised, and now invalid, will. "This is a lie!" Delia suddenly shrieked. It was a raw, ugly sound. Her lawyer put his hand on her arm, but she shook it off. "I was protecting my husband. I would never." "Ms. Cross," the judge warned, "you are not on the stand." Ms. Hayes stood one last time. Then perhaps Ms. Cross can explain Exhibit F, an email from her, to her previous lawyer, Mr. Jennings, dated 8 months ago. The email flashed on the screen. I knew it by heart. How can we adjust the terms to reflect his true wishes? "I want to ensure Avery receives only the sentimental items. She doesn't need his money. We do. We need to protect the new family." Delia went silent. The color drained from her face. The final word was not mine, or hers. It was my father's. He was not in the courtroom. He was still in the care facility, but his sworn testimony, given to the guardian ad litem, was read aloud by the judge. The judge cleared his throat, and his voice softened as he read. "I was pressured. I was confused for so long. I didn't remember signing anything. Delia told me to trust her, that it was to protect us. I was just so tired. I was scared." The judge paused, then read the last line. "My daughter. Avery is not greedy. She is a good daughter. I am the one who failed her." The room was absolutely, painfully still. The judge set the paper down. He looked at Delia Cross for a very long, very cold minute. Then he spoke. "This court," he began, his voice booming, "finds a clear and disturbing pattern of undue influence, coercion, and financial exploitation, originating with a physical assault." The gavel was in his hand. "Therefore, this court rules as follows. The powers of attorney signed by Graham Calder on June 12th are hereby declared null and void, having been obtained under duress and without capacity. The original lock clause from the will of Elizabeth Calder is affirmed and restored to full effect. He looked at the prosecutor in the front row. This court finds overwhelming probable cause for criminal investigation into felony financial elder abuse, forgery, and grand larceny, and refers this entire matter to the district attorney's office. Delia made a small, choking sound, like a gasp. Furthermore, the judge continued, a permanent restraining order is granted. Ms. Delia Cross is barred from all contact, direct or indirect, with Ms. Avery Calder. All assets related to Blue Lark renovations and BC Artistic Ventures are frozen. Finally, this court, based on the recommendation of the guardian ad litem, hereby appoints a temporary independent conservator for Mr. Graham Calder. Neither Ms. Cross nor Ms. Calder will have control. The estate is, as of this moment, sealed. He struck the gavel. It was done. The sound was like a bone snapping. Delia just sat there, frozen. Her lawyer, already packing his briefcase, did not even look at her. We stood. As we filed out, Delia seemed to wake from her trance. She saw me. Her eyes, which had been so sharp and calculating, were just empty. They were shattered. She took a step toward me, her hand outstretched. Avery, wait. Before she could take another step, a bailiff was between us. Ma'am, the bailiff said, his voice flat and bored. The order. You need to stay back. She flinched, as if he had struck her. She looked at the officer, then at me, and all the fight, all the fire, just evaporated. She wasn't a shark. She was just a woman in a wrinkled suit who had lost. In the row behind her, Brielle finally reacted. She wasn't looking at her mother. She was looking at her phone, her face pale. It's not working, she whispered, her voice a panicked wail. It's not. My card is locked. She started to cry, not for her mother, not for my father. She was crying for the locked credit card. I walked out, Ms. Hayes at my side. The local reporter rushed up, a microphone in her hand. Ms. Calder, do you have any comment on the criminal charges? I looked at her. I thought about Delia's Facebook post. I thought about Brielle's stupid winking emoji. I put my hand up. I have no comment, I said. The public record speaks for itself. The next day, the Stonebrook Gazette ran a front-page story. It wasn't about a family spat. The headline was, Local Philanthropist Investigated for Elder Abuse, Fraud. There was no room left for her lies. I stood on the sidewalk, the air cold and clean. I took out my phone. I didn't open Instagram. I didn't open Facebook. I opened my messages. I took a picture of the new bouquet of white lilies on my kitchen table, the ones I had bought the day before. I sent it to my father at the facility. I typed one sentence, I'm waiting for you to come over for dinner. I put the phone in my pocket. I looked up at the gray sky. I thought about that heavy wooden door at the Stonebrook house, the one that had been closed in my face on Thanksgiving, the sound of it locking, but that's not what I heard. In my mind, I heard the sound of the judge's gavel. It was the same sound, not a door closing. It was the sound of a heavy, brass lock finally, clicking open. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'm really interested to know. Where are you guys listening from right now? Let me know in the comments so we can all connect and share our thoughts. And if you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Make sure to like this video and give that hype button a tap so that this story can be heard by more people.